Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker. I'm the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation and excited about our show today. But before we jump into it, maybe you're new to our channel. If you have not yet, please go ahead and subscribe. You can hit that notification bell as well, and that will notify you when new shows come online. We'd love to stay in touch with you and keep you up to date with what's going on here. Perhaps you're listening on one of our partner stations, and if that's the case, when you get some time, jump over to the YouTube channel. And you can find us, Mighty Oaks Show, and there's a ton of videos, ton of information. And really what we strive to do when we post videos to YouTube is put out information that's helpful. And a lot of people have found help and hope there. So go ahead and subscribe there, and that would be great. Our guest today is someone that I'm getting to know better. We met over the phone and kind of digitally. We communicated quite a bit, but this is our first face-to-face, I think. And it's not really in person because you're on the other side of the country. But Adam Davis is with us. And I told Adam, he's kind of like an onion. The more layers you peel, the more there are to find. He's done a little bit of everything, but currently is working in the same space we are, but primarily with the first responder community. Adam is a retired police officer and writes on this and speaks on this and really is out there on the front line doing much of the same things that we're doing with the veteran community. And man, it's just awesome to have you, Adam. And I wrote down kind of a list of the things that you're involved in. You've been a police officer, author. You work with the Chris Kyle Foundation, which I'd like for you to talk about in a little while. You also own a marketing company, which is like, also owns a marketing company and probably does a bunch of other stuff. But tell us your story and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Hey, listen, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's a huge honor. I've been following your stuff and what you guys put out on social media. And of course, we've talked a couple of times, and I hate I couldn't make it out to California back a couple of months ago. Had a death in the family. But I tell you, it's I'm a former cop. I left in 2015. It's a long story, but so right now, today, I've just finished my fifth book, and it was the second in a series of three that I'm co-authoring with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Most of you will know who that is, author of On Combat and On Killing. That book is slated for release in 2020, and it'll be based on his best-selling book On Combat. It'll be called On Spiritual Combat. So check that out. This probably 8 months away, so we're good there. I've written several books, and it's funny. We talk to police officers across the country. Writing reports just isn't something that they derive a lot of joy and satisfaction from. So I found that writing was sort of therapeutic for me. I had gotten to some very dark places emotionally and mentally. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I was absolutely and radically redeemed by the love of a Savior who never left me when I was in the darkest places. And I have an obligation to tell people about the love of Jesus and how real His love is. And even in my lowest places, He is. And so, a lot of what I write about is stuff that I've been through. Indirectly, I'm sharing that, And so, now I've just finished my fifth book. I've got 3 more lined up, and going and speaking all over the place. And my role with the Chris Kyle Foundation is I'm director of outreach. Taya and I work together on some stuff, and the audio book version of Bulletproof Marriage will be releasing very shortly. And she narrated that, and during some of our discussions of that, it really come to light that we needed to take the conversations we were having and they needed to be on a platform somewhere. They needed to be heard by the masses, and it was just really phenomenal, man. I mean, it was awesome. And so we've done some work there. We're actually going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in August 13th, I believe. And so I was recently on the Team Never Quit podcast with Marcus Luttrell and those guys, and man, they've just brought me in and just circled me up and said, "Hey, you're not going to be out there running solo anymore. You're one of us. You're part of us." And so it's awesome to be coming around these different organizations and all these amazing people and yourself and you guys at Mighty Oaks included. I felt for the longest time I was out here doing it on my own. I knew that God was with me. That's a given. But there's power in numbers, especially like minds and people on the same mission. And I get calls almost every day. Or let me rephrase that. I get calls, messages, emails, some form of communication from cops or spouses, veterans, almost every single day. Whether they're sharing a testimony, they're requesting prayer, they're just wanting to connect and talk, whatever. And so, my life is not I don't have a single job. I left the police department in 2015. It was right after I had self-published my very first book, which was Very Humble Beginnings. And I was trying to find a copy of it. Very Humble Beginnings that I don't like to revisit, but I'm extremely grateful for. I don't market that book, but
right.
I'm very thankful for that because it was a lesson in obedience. And I felt impressed to write the book. I felt like the Holy Spirit was leading me to write the book, and I didn't feel qualified to write the book, but I did it. And so it created a lot of opportunities, and I had a business on the side that I wasn't telling anybody about the marketing business. It was just growing organically. And so it was a decision my wife and I prayed about extensively. It was a huge step of faith to leave. And there's not a day goes by I don't miss putting on my uniform and doing the work. I miss those guys, but there's no doubt that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and this was divinely orchestrated. And so, really, my focus now is really organizing relationships with organizations and teams and individuals to create something that's sustainable. Because Bulletproof Marriage and Behind the Badge are quietly breathing fire into a movement across this country. And I'm, maybe I'm just crazy enough to believe it, but I think our veterans, our military servicemen and women, our first responders are the tip of the spear when it comes to a radical, amazing change where this nation is touched by the love of Christ like we've never seen. And I am obligated to give back, and that's what I'm doing every day. So there's a lot of big things coming, but man, how awesome it is to be able to share all this with you guys. And share my time. I'm very grateful.
So one of the things we talk about throughout our program, and if you just come to our program and check it out instead of avoiding it like you have for the last 6 months,
Yeah.
I know you'll get out here. I know you'll get out here. But one of the things we do through our program is talk about our stories, and really it's the power of testimony, right? God gives you a story. And you can choose to do something with that story. You can either redeem it for value and for good, or you can sit on it and hide it and brood over it and feel bad about it. But there's real power in the story. And I think particularly in the veteran and the first responder communities, the power in the story is a group of people who really have been taught to put up a wall, to hide behind that wall, refuse to share anything personal that's going on. Even though your home life is a mess and all of your relationships are broken, you pretend like you've got it all together. And the power in testimony for those of us that come from those communities is we can break down that wall, look someone in the eye and say, I know where you've been, I know what you're going through, and we can walk through this thing together. And there's a lot of power there. And that's what you're doing. So talk about your time as a police officer, some of the things that you experienced. Were you a believer when you were as a police officer? And if not, how did that come to be? And talk about, that and where you are.
Yeah, so I shared my testimony. The 700 Club actually sent a film crew of producers down to Dothan, Alabama, where I live, and they followed me around for 2 days, 8 hours over 2 days. And the title of that is Living Up to God's Rules or something like that. I grew up in a pastor's home, Assembly of God. Hard preaching Pentecostal church services, man.
Say no more. I grew up in a pastor's home too, so we don't even need to talk anymore. I know where you're coming from.
I got saved every service, right? And so, no, man. And this is by no means a slant against my family or any of my previous pastors or churches.
Of course,
I bear the full weight of responsibility for what I had done in my life, and that was I tried to perform the relationship with God. It was all about, you cussed, and God's not going to have anything to do with you today, or You did this or whatever it was, just name it, that affected his love for you. Does it affect your relationship? Yeah, but it's from our perspective. And so when I got into law enforcement, let me just preface it by saying I had a rules and relationship perspective of who he was. Did I know the word? Yes. Did I have a close relationship with him? I saw him as somebody that was ready to punish me at any given moment for something I did. I knew who he was. I don't think I really knew him. I really don't. Not the way I do today.
Right.
And so a few years rock on, I started off, they had me night shift patrol. Honestly, I probably, of all my regrets, I regret leaving night shift patrol. That was the most fun I had. That and traffic patrol, they put me on day shift, and then they moved me over to traffic homicide, and then over to criminal investigations, where I became a hostage negotiator and criminal intelligence and all this other. I always wore multiple hats. Right. And really, investigations is where I learned how to manage and balance a never-ending workload that never goes away. So it's always going to be there. And so, man, I was running hard with the crew, and we worked hard, we worked really hard, and then we played really hard. And so I would try to have this perspective and this image on the outside that everything was good to go, that I was okay, that I was a strong man, I was a great cop, and all the while inside I was falling apart. I was dying and dead, and my marriage was falling apart, and I was putting a Band-Aid over all that stuff with pursuing other relationships. Maybe it was just an adrenaline fix. I don't know what you want to call it, the response to trauma, being a horrible person. However it was, I did it. And then drinking a lot. But I'd come home and take my vest, I'd take my gear off, whatever, and I just sit in the chair. And I think this was really one of the turning points for me, sitting in the chair in the living room and just staring at the wall. I had nothing to say. My wife would say, how was your, and I'd either just say, I don't want to talk about it, or it was good, it was fine. And then one day I responded and said, I just dealt with this case, and this case. I named off suicide by gunfire, or a murder, or rape, or whatever. And I said, I just dealt with this, and then admin issues, and then whatever. And I said, I really don't want to have to rehash my day. So if we could just move on, that'd be awesome. And so I'll never forget. That was sort of a point to where I realized something had to change. But we had a couple of guys that they weren't killed in the line of duty. One died in his sleep. I think he had a seizure, and another had a heart attack in training. So that was technically line of duty. And then another was killed in a car wreck. And I had been hard. Like, I found myself hugging a toilet. And Jeremy, as we're sitting here talking, I can't remember anything from that night, but I remember hugging the toilet. And I remember it felt like the Holy Spirit reached down to where I was and said, there's nothing you can do to ever change my love for you, ever. And, so in a drunken stupor, he still knew how to, he still loved me, and that set something up. So I wrestled. I got to a point where it was whether it was the deaths, or whether it was the negotiations, whether it was the whatever you want to call it. I don't know that I really like the labels, but I dodged the labels and I dodged the help for a long time. And so when I sit and think about, I got to the point where I was like, if you're really God, and, you're love, because your word says you're love, then why are all these things happening around us? Why do you allow small babies to die like this? Why do you allow innocent people to die like this? And why all the pain? Why all the evil? Why all the hate? If you really love us. So I went into a full-on, let's get in the ring and wrestle for however many months that went on. It was a miserable time. My God, man, it was miserable. It was horrible, because I wasn't wrestling with, did God exist? I never doubted his existence. I was wrestling with, are you really loved, and are you really good by your nature? And so, and if you are, then you got to help me. So I wrestled, and I got to the point to where my wife was like, you got to go, or I'm going to go.
Right.
I was sitting in a patrol car one day working overtime, and I remember just tears, and I don't cry. I'm like, I don't cry, period. And I began to, I can't put two and two together. I can't prove you to anyone from an investigative standpoint. I can't lay it out that this is what I believe. I don't have physical proof of this stuff in my hand, like building a case, literally. But I said, I choose to believe in you. I choose to believe that you have the best interest for me and that you love me. And I want you to have every part of me, like take everything. And something happened in that patrol car that day, man, something that turned my life around forever. And it was a total surrender of there wasn't a bunch of drastic changes. Nothing happened really, magically overnight. It was a very humble but wonderful moment that changed everything. And it was just surrender. It could have happened at an altar in a church, could have happened in a bar, honky tonk, on the beach, you name it. It could have happened anywhere, but it was in a patrol car because that's where I spent 90% of my time. And so in that surrender, I began to realize my absolute need for him in my life in every way. And so I began to make small changes, and things started happening, started spending time in his word and cutting off all the running that I was doing, drinking with the guys and all the other stuff I had going on. And one day I come home, and I was a college student. I didn't start school until like 29 or 30 years old, and first person to go to school and graduate in my family. And I was writing. So I would come home and sit down to write, just to kind of dump what I had that day out of my head onto something. And it felt really good, like I had talked to somebody. It was almost like therapy for me.
Yeah.
And so I started to write everything. And so one night I come home, took my vest off, and I think it was right after Ferguson, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that time frame. I sat down and I started to write, and I was just mad. I was angry. And is every time you turn on the news, nobody's going to say, well, this officer did this or whatever, these guys are doing a good job, or,
sure.
You never hear that. You always hear the negative, and it's just venomous, vile hatred. And I said, God, who is going to stand up and speak into these men and women? Yeah. Who is going to do something? And I felt like I was supposed to write the book. And so I wrote Spirit and Truth, and it was a very humble beginning. And 6 months later, I left law enforcement. And a few months after that, I had my first traditional book publishing contract for Behind the Badge. It's a 365-day devotion. And then the day it released on May of 2018, I signed my first multi-book deal with Colonel Grossman. And now I'm in the talks with some wonderful people about doing some other work that if I said their names, which I can't yet,
sure,
you will know who they are. And it was all an act of obedience. Writing the book was an act of obedience. I know it's effective because I hear the testimony. I know that it's working. I know it's doing what it's supposed to do. All of them. Yeah. And so it was an act of obedience that's showing fruit for his kingdom, and it's literally saving lives. I can't tell you the number of guys who said they had planned their own suicide, and the Holy Spirit used something in these books to connect and change everything. And so it's changed the course of life. So I look back at everything I went through, and I sort of have this, never win. And anything I went through it, I don't care what you've been through to other people. Everybody's got their own hell that they've been through. They've got their own demons, skeletons, and all that stuff. And, I think it's very important that you realize for me to realize where he brought me, but that I don't forget him on the way as far as the lessons he's taught me. And so these books were great ways to say, this is how I almost destroyed my marriage. Right. And these are ways that you can course correct those things and correct those behaviors. And that's where Bulletproof Marriage come from. And then Colonel Grossman's principles that he uses in the Bulletproof Mind Seminar. So today, that's, September, my wife and I be many years, and we've got 3 Basset Hound that's lazy as all get out. And, I think for me at this point, it's really about balance. It's about finding the power and the balance and that rhythm, and understanding that, that it's a constant work, and there's plenty for everybody out there to do. And so traveling and speaking, writing books and speaking sounds like it's extremely glamorous and, on TV and radio and all this, man, it's a ton of work. and it's a lot emotionally and mentally and spiritually, spiritual warfare every single day. But more on that later. But that's sort of a little bit in a nutshell what went down. And I mean, we could go into all kinds of different scenarios and situations and things. And I mean, I got to the point to where, and I don't like to talk about it a lot because I don't want to glorify it, but I got to the point to where, and I think it was in that wrestling match, that sort of that place I was at, and I call it a wrestling match because most of the people who we talk to get that. it was a ground fight. I got to the point where I was like, I would literally be better off dead. My wife and kids would be better off if I was dead.
Right.
I never got to the point where I sat down and said, how am I going to do it or any of that. But I got to the point I felt so hopeless in my mind. And it was probably just a pity party. I just didn't want to face the facts of what I had created, what I had done. And so I get it. I mean, I get waking up thinking I would be better off dead. I would be better off if I wasn't here. My wife and kids would be better off if I wasn't here. I'd be better off as never born. And then I realized all that was just a lie of the enemy, and understanding how to address that. So it's redemption is a wonderful thing, but it's not always easy. It's kind of like having to breach into a make entry into a room and go grab somebody out. You're not going in with flowers, roses, and champagne.
Right.
It's a hot extraction, and that's sort of what he did for me. And man, I'm grateful because I don't know where I'd be today if it wasn't for him.
Yeah. Incredible, man. What do you tell someone who says they're mad at God? I'll give this little kind of, we talk to people all the time. They're like, I don't even believe in God. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You can say that. I don't believe, you don't believe, but let's just say you're angry at God. And really, when you boil it down, that's what it is, right? It's how could you let this happen or that happen or whatever the experience is. And it sounds like that's kind of what you were wrestling with a little bit. What do you say to someone who says, I'm mad at God. I can't believe you let that happen. And I'm not sure I trust him anymore.
Well, God is, he's certainly capable of handling your anger, and he's certainly capable of listening to your anger. And, the people that say, I don't believe in God, they've already declared he exists because they've already placed him in a place that they've identified him and said, I don't believe in, and that he already exists. And so I look at it from a couple of different perspectives. And I'm very practical. I'm not a theologian. I study the word, but I don't hold degrees in divinity and theology and all this. And I like to keep it on a level that all of us will get, because I'm not the smartest man in the room here. But
and you're the only one in your room, which is saying something. So.
But to say, if you said you're angry at God, for me, it's understanding where the anger comes from. He's okay with that. The fact that he loves you, that he exists, and it's a fallen creation, and it's a world that's run by the enemy. And so we've got an opportunity to rise up and be the answer to somebody's prayer, because we are the ones that come when people are praying. God sends us. He sends uniformed men and women to handle the evil of this world. We know that the enemy was cast down, and he rules. I mean, this is his playground, and we are here for a reason. And that's why we see the evil around us. It's not God allowing it to happen. It's not God, punishing you or punishing us. It is the fact, it is the reality of a fallen world dominated by evil. And I think in part we have to understand that if we want that to change, we have to walk in the fullness of what he's called us to do. I think it's very important to understand the enemy. John 10, to kill, steal, and destroy. But Jesus said, I came that you might have life and life more abundantly, life to the fullest, meaning that he has given us all the resources we need, our battles every single day, and walk through in total, absolute victory. So anger is just a symptom of a deeper issue, and it's a surface issue that we all have. It's a relational thing. So if you have a true understanding and perception of his goodness and his love, that it doesn't change anything if you say you don't believe in him. He still exists, and he's still going to demonstrate his goodness everywhere around you. If you'll just look, he's there, and he's showing himself to you. And it's just a matter, you got to get there. It sounds like, if people call and want help, you can't help somebody that doesn't want the help, and you can't help them if they don't want to be helped and do the work. And so, I don't engage in debates and arguments, mainly because I don't have time. And, I've been talking to some very brilliant people who hold those beliefs that he doesn't exist, that we existed from some random explosion in space. But I think for us as believers, it's important to understand that the only way that we can sow effective seed is on a relational level. They may be entertaining and they may play, but for the most part, it's the relational thing. It's understanding that God will reveal himself and his love, and that he's okay. He is perfectly okay with you being angry at him, and he will help you work through that if you'll ask him.
Yeah.
And so it's faith. You forgive as an act of obedience and faith. You believe as an act of obedience and faith. Everything is a walk of faith, trusting him. And he didn't cause it. He didn't allow it. He didn't permit it. It's part of a fallen world. He put us here to do the work. He's given us the power of his Holy Spirit and his word, and walk in it and handle business.
Yeah. You mentioned that, there was a point in time you and your wife, your wife said, I just can't do this anymore. I can't handle this anymore. I don't want to deal with this. You surrendered to Christ. Your life started to change a little bit at a time. I think often there's a misunderstanding or a misperception that when, husband or wife makes a decision to pursue Christ and they begin to make good decisions, that immediately, just like that, everything changes. The past is no longer valid. I know what you did over there, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It's a long process. Can you talk about that a little bit? I think there's some hopelessness with people, particularly someone who would come through like one of our programs, and they make a good decision. They're going forward, and they get home and their spouse just isn't ready to hear it.
Yeah. So some healing is instant. I've seen it. We read about it in the Bible. There's a lot of demonstrations of instant healing in our generation.
Yeah.
Relationships, emotions, physically, mentally, whatever. But most of the time, healing is progressive. And that's what we're talking about. We have to identify what's going on, and what we're seeing is healing taking place.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual healing. It's an emotional healing, mental healing, relational healing. And it's not going to take place overnight. I've got folks that I talk to, and they'll do the work for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then just everything gets, it's like taking medicine, right? Like taking an antibiotic. You start getting the feeling better, and you don't finish taking your medicine or whatever.
Right.
And so you stop taking your medicine. I don't take anything right now, but you stop taking your medicine because you start feeling better, but you haven't addressed the issue, the root of the problem. And so I think that the biggest thing is understanding that it's being disciplined to do the work every day. And when I say do the work, I mean allow him to work on me by spending time in his word and in prayer and in worship. If you're married, pray with your spouse. One prayer, 1 day, one prayer, 7 days, one prayer, 10 days from now, 3 months from now. Praying is always good. There's nothing wrong with praying. But if you really want to see spectacular and magnificent change, do it every day consistently for a long period of time. Does that mean things are going to be easy? Absolutely not. But you'll have the power to overcome whatever challenges come your way. And so if you're going through something and your spouse is really hungry for a major change, I think it's important to communicate, hey, I'm doing the work. I'm going to do this. This is what I'm doing every day. But you're not going to see an immediate change. We're human beings. So doing that work for a long period of time every day, because it isn't a legalistic approach. It isn't a performance approach. It's like taking the medicine that you need to stay alive. I mean, if you got medicine you have to take just to keep existing, you take it every day at the same time, no matter what. And so it's a relationship medicine. If we want to have a healthy relationship with the Father, we spend time with the Father. We spend time in the Word. We spend time in prayer and worship. And it's not always on your knees with your head bowed and your hands together, and
right.
You read a psalm or you read something. It's in here. I'm constantly keeping my focus on him. Even when things get horrible around me, I stop and I say, my focus is on you, and I need your help. I need you to intervene and direct my path and give me the wisdom. And you're constantly praying in here, and people may not hear it, but you're constantly in a spirit of prayer.
Yeah.
And so that's very important. It's a whole mindset change. It's a mindset that affects everything that you do. And it's not always easy. You're not going to see the fruits instantaneously. And a lot of times we're approaching this relationship with him with a mindset that is our own mindset, and it's not the way he thinks about us. So when we understand how he sees us and how he thinks about us, and you find that in his word, that changes everything. It causes us want to approach him and pursue a relationship as our Father. And so for me, that's what changed everything, is because I've had people abandon me and walk away and just never talk to you again. And in my worst place, he never left me, ever. Right. And at my very worst. And so I have an obligation to call on him every day, but I'm not doing it out of obligation or doing it because I want to, because I know that that's where my power is, and it's in a relationship with him. So, yeah, that's, I think in a nutshell is, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to see a change overnight. It's just got to be a mutual effort and a mutual trust, and you've got to be willing to do the work every day and have that discipline, the selfless love, and the commitment to do it.
Yeah. How important is, and you allude to this, but how important is focusing on God as your first relationship to the sustained growth and healing in your earthly relationship or your spousal relationship? Because I think sometimes people get it upside down. I'll grow in my relationship with God as long as those other relationships are coming along. And when the other relationships don't come along as fast as I want them to, then this falls off, which if you keep your focus here, I think the other ones will come along, but we miss that sometimes.
Yeah, we do. And I had to get to the point to where, and this was a huge, it may be really stupid, but it was a huge step of faith for me, especially as a small business owner, was, hey, you know what? If they want to come take the house, if they want to take the cars, if they want to take everything I've got, I'm going to love you. You are everything to me. And you pulled me out of the darkest places and literally pulled me out of the pits of hell. And then you look at your relationship with your wife, your family, your children. At what point do we crave a relationship with everybody else but him? When does that change? I think it's important to know that you identified it as idolatry, when we want relationships with them more than we want one with him.
Right.
And that's a hard pill to swallow. So I got to the point, I said, hey, every day I lift them up. They're yours. Everything I've got, everyone I've got, the family I have, the gifts I have, the needs I have, they're all yours. Everything I've got here is yours. If you'll just give me the wisdom and how to operate and what to do, where to go, I'll do it. I'll be obedient to you. But I just ask, I want to be a good steward of it. Every relationship we have is like the talents he gave the men. One talent, 3 talents, 5, or whatever. It's a talent. And we got to be cognizant that we take care of those relationships, but not before we take care of our relationship with him. Yeah. Not that there's anything we can do to ever affect his love for us or the way he loves us and cares about us, but it's a response to his love.
Right. And
I think too often we don't respond to his love because we haven't experienced his love. We've experienced the rules and regulations. So for me, it's important, because if you put job and nice home and car, you've taken everything into your own hands and essentially placed it above him, and that in its very core definition is idolatry. So spend time with him. This is not a guarantee that everything is going to work out. It's not a guarantee that everything's going to be great and perfect and peaceful, but it is a guarantee that through whatever you may face, he will be your comfort. He will be your strength. And he says in his word, he'll give us the desires of our heart. And he'll take care of those things if we're faithful and to him and do what he calls us to do. So it's if you have him first, you put him first, everything else will take care of itself. It may not take care of it the way we think it should take care of itself or perceive it should, but it will take care of itself.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. You said this earlier, that everyone thinks that writing books and traveling and speaking is really romantic and really awesome. I always joke that the only people that like to travel are people that don't travel, because traveling is, I wouldn't change it. I would not change it, but it is a lot of work. It's not all fun and stuff, right? And you're tired all the time. And I've also written a couple books, and taking it from a thought and an outline to pen on paper, or typing it in at 5 a.m, because that's when you get a quiet house and you're working. It's just work at some point. It's awesome work, and again, you wouldn't trade it, but it's work. So tell us what motivates Adam Davis to travel, to speak, to write, to do what you do. What's that one thing that motivates you? And I mean, I think listening to you up to this point, we could figure it out. But when you're laying in bed and you're like, man, I don't want to get up and put 1,000 words on a piece of paper today. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to this next speaking thing. How do you respond to that?
For me, it is an act of worship to the Father. It's obedience and the service. When I sit down, and I heard Mark Batterson say this one time. He's the author of a bunch of books.
Yeah.
He said he would pull up to his keyboard, and he would sit down, and he would take his shoes off, and he'd be ready to write, but he wouldn't start until he was revering where he was at, because it is holy ground. It is an act of worship. I've always been protective of that gift, and maybe that's why God has rewarded me. I don't know if that's what you want to say, with more opportunities. He's certainly blessed it. And maybe that's why, is because I've guarded it, because it's a mindset surrounding our gifts that if we're not careful, we turn it into, we're pimping out our gifts, and it becomes just work like anything else. And I mean, it's like, there's a word for sex without intimacy. Sex is not intimacy, and intimacy is not sex. And so sex without intimacy is prostitution. You're just getting something for your own self-satisfaction and gratification. And so when we use our gifts for our own self-gratification, we're pimping out our gifts, and we're not honoring God with them. So I've been very protective. I've had, I don't know how many offers to ghostwrite books, to just to write articles and get paid for them, stuff that I really don't care about. It's about honoring Him through the way you honor the gift.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I go and speak, the reason why I write, is because He's given me those gifts, and I want to return them to Him and honor Him with them with excellence. And so whether I'm in a church of 75, 100 people, or an audience of 10,000, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Is honor Him with excellence. And I have to do it. It's who I was created to be. I was born for this, and I was born for this moment, and He's prepared me for this moment with everything I've been through. Could it have been easier? I'm quite sure that if I had not been so stupid and stubborn at times, it would have been. But I'm very thankful for the scars and the wounds and the lessons I've learned. And so the reason to write and speak is to glorify Him, to honor Him with the gifts, and ultimately, that others may know Him and know His name, and have an experience with His love, like I had in that car that day. When I surrendered, I hugged my mama, my grandmama, my wife, my sisters, friends, family, strangers, you name it. But nothing compares to the embrace I felt from His love in that moment, and that I continue to feel every day. I know that I'm loved. And we're big, strong men, and we don't talk about that kind of stuff. And we don't tell people about our feelings. Maybe we've started a trend. We've started not really a trend, but a shift in the culture that says we're human beings, and the only way we can deal with things is to expose it. The only way for me to have dealt with suicidal thoughts and substance abuse, or whatever else you want to call it, was to put the light on it. And once you expose it in the darkness, and it has no power, it loses all of its power. And for me, it's exposing those things. And the truth is that you were created with a purpose, and that purpose was to honor him, to glorify him, to live your life to the fullest, and to love him and love others and use the gifts that he's given you. And when we align ourselves with those things, everything else changes. So that's why I do what I do.
How do you, with all that in mind, how do you determine what you will do and what you won't do? So you have good opportunities to speak or to write. How do you determine what's in line with those goals and what's not?
Ultimately, I look at the mission that he's given me, and are there going to be times that I have to go do something somewhere where ultimately people don't agree with everything they're doing, or people don't agree with everything I do, whatever? I look at, number one, can we reach people for him? Can we reach people for him? I'm not really concerned about my own reputation. As far as if I go somewhere and somebody says, well, Adam Davis went and spoke at this place, now he's not worth anything. I really don't care about that. Yeah. It's being obedient to what he's given me. I have to look at it sometimes from a financial perspective. Can I afford to go?
Yeah, right.
Do I have the money to go?
Yeah, that's real.
From a practical standpoint, God doesn't print money and he doesn't make furniture. And so he gives us talents and opportunities. So for me, it's looking at, does the opportunity allow me the chance to use the gifts he's given me? And is there a relationship there that we can work with to reach more people for his kingdom? There's financial aspects. For me, it has to be something that is going to allow me the opportunity to restore lives and to help people experience a restoration and a redemption that only Christ can bring.
Yeah.
And that's done through sharing his story, sharing the word, sharing my testimony, and breaking it down in a way that everybody can receive it.
Yeah, that's good. If you had a police officer sitting across the table from you and they're struggling, whatever the struggle is, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't go on. Maybe you get a call from a spouse and you show up at a house and there's somebody actually sitting there with a gun saying, this is it. Thanks for coming, but it's over. What do you tell them? What's the one piece of information they need to know?
Well, without me going into crisis negotiator mode, my first thing is going to be take the gun, talk the gun out of them, but no, not from an operational standpoint. From a ministry standpoint, is to sit down and to be present. Because a lot of times they've tried to get help, and our society says, well, you're a fill in the blank if you've got these problems, or you're just doing it for attention. Too often we undervalue the gift of presence. Mm. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen and I'm going to talk to him and I'm going to listen. That's so important. There's a lost art of listening. Listen. And when I listen to what he's talking about and what his real problem and pain is, then I can either by my own experience, based on his word, or the gift of the Spirit, of the Holy Spirit, address it.
Yeah.
And but they've got to want help. I've had to come to terms with that, man. I have wrestled. I have had some not sleep over folks that just they don't want the help.
Yeah.
And if they want the help, we're good. If they want the help, we're good. If they don't want the help, I can talk until I'm blue in the face, and it's not going to matter. But you have to get to the point, number one, that you recognize, as cheesy as it sounds for men to say this, you are loved.
Sure.
You are loved. You are loved on a scale that you'll never be able to comprehend. We will never be able to fully comprehend the love God has for us, ever. We can tell the stories all day, but I am fully convinced that when we do get to eternity, we'll realize we've not really scratched the tip of the surface. And love for us is immeasurable. And when we understand that he loves us, then the circumstances around us are temporary. The pressures that we have, listen, I get it. I get it. I know what it's like to have a foreclosure notice, no idea where your money's going to come from. The repo man pops up at 9 o'clock at night. Your wife hates your guts because you have been a complete moron. The only option you have is to die because maybe your life insurance will cover it. I get it. I get it from a practical point. I get it. But that's a lie because we've been conditioned in our society to look for an easy way out. I'm not saying that your pain is a lie. I'm not saying that the place you're at is a lie. I'm saying that the thought that you're better off dead is a lie.
Yeah.
Because you have a divine and a very powerful purpose, or the enemy wouldn't be trying to take you out.
Yeah.
If he didn't want to take you out, then whatever. So you have to understand that those thoughts will probably never go away. But you've been given the power to take control of those thoughts and take them captive under the authority of the Word of God. And when we take them captive under the authority, surrender ourselves to him, come under the authority of his word, and walk in his love, we can not only experience change for ourselves, but change others and see them change. But I think it's very important to answer your question. If I was there, I'm not just going to walk up and try to grab the gun.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down, and first ministry, the first position of ministry is presence. And then the second ministry is listening. Mm-hmm. And then when we do those two things, we'll be given a lot of gifts by listening that we can address the problem and probably walk away with a very good resolution.
I think, so connected to that, you, like us, will get messages from spouses and from parents who they reach out to us because they think we can do something even though their loved one doesn't want help. And then they'll ask, well, what can I do? What can I do? They don't want help yet, or they're not listening to me. What can I do? What kind of advice do you give? And often, honestly, the advice I give is it's very hard to help someone who doesn't want help. There's not much that you can do other than keep the door open. And that feels hollow and empty, but really that's the best I can do sometimes. What advice do you give to family members like that?
No, listen, if they're not wanting to listen to you, if they're not wanting to do what they're supposed to do, I mean, I've got people in my family right now that they're just going to have to hit bottom, man.
Yeah.
You just be there for them. Again,
be there.
We undervalue the ministry of presence. We undervalue the ministry of presence. We need to be better stewards of understanding how to host his presence. We don't have to pray his spirit down, as we often hear in church. Let your spirit come down. He is in our midst. He is constantly in our midst. And we have to be better at understanding the ministry of presence. First, his presence, hosting his presence, responding to situations and circumstances, knowing that he is there. And that when we're talking to another person, that they're not just another person. We see their greasy hair, we see the tears, we see all the things that are maybe wrong with them. We see the gun in their hand, but we fail to see them as one of his.
Right.
And whether they've accepted that or not, they're one of his. He created them, and he sent his son to give everything for them. And when we approach it from that perspective, it changes. So the first thing is ministry of presence. Sometimes being there and continuing to serve with an open hand. A lot of times we forgive, especially in marriages. We forgive, or other family relationships, we forgive with the expectation that it will never, whatever the offense was, it'll never happen again. But what if we're called to forgive and expect it to happen again? Forgive them regardless, period. Hold your hands out, feed them, serve them, love them, and continue to have the ministry of presence. And in due season, if you sow the seed, I think that you'll see a breakthrough. But you can't talk your way through to somebody who's not ready.
Right.
Just pray for them, sow the seed, and be there for them. And you can't help people that don't want to help themselves. And sometimes for me, that means just walking away.
Yeah.
Just taking my hands off and walking away and putting them in his hands. And if they come back and they want the help, then give them help. But you really, I think the first thing you need to do is pray for wisdom. That's the very first thing for me to do is pray for wisdom on it, and then just be there, man. I think that's so important. We have lost the art of presence in our society, and it's so important that we get back to a point where we're just willing to sit down across the table or on the couch or on the porch with somebody and just listen to them, man.
Yeah.
I think if we did that as a culture, as a society, not just as veterans, first responders, whatever, as a country, we could probably resolve a lot of the problems we have today. But these stupid things have created, I mean, they're great tools.
Yeah.
But they've become horrible hindrances in relationships. And so there used to be a time, I was listening to a comedian earlier, I forget his name. Anyway, I'll think of it later. But he was talking about there used to be a time when we had the phones in the home, like the physical phones that had the cords.
Yeah.
Or the one on the wall at the Rotary, that when it called, you'd say, who in the world's calling? And you'd argue over who's going to go answer the phone.
Right.
Because you were either busy watching a baseball game with your dad, or you were drinking coffee with your mom, or you were drinking coffee with your wife. You didn't want whatever was ringing that phone to interrupt what you were doing with somebody else. And now that's all we do is we're constantly building a relationship with this thing.
Right.
And we're neglecting our relationship with other people. So
now we get mad when other people talk to us while we're on our phone.
Why? You're calling me. Yeah.
It's gone the other way around.
Yeah.
Hey, so as we come to a close, one thing I'd like for you to talk about for a minute is hope. The word hope. Without hope, we make really bad decisions, and I think that's where a lot of people end up, is they're just hopeless. Where do you find hope?
Yeah.
What does hope mean to you?
I have to think back to the times and this is just being extremely vulnerable, because we're not supposed to ever feel hopeless, right? And I feel hopeless when I take my eyes off him. I'm sure that's how Peter felt when he was no longer walking on water and began to sink. You feel hopeless when you focus on the circumstances around you. You feel hopeless when you see everything that's temporary as eternal, and you don't see the eternal as it is, and you see the eternal as temporary. It's all about perspective. Hope is about perspective and reality, but we have to have a proper perspective on our eternal reality before we can truly have hope. And so if I see eternity and I see everything I do here as part of my journey to eternity, it's all about loving him and loving others. And I see what I'm doing here is storing up for eternity. That the problems I may have, whether they're relational problems, health problems, financial problems, career, whatever, those are all temporary. There's a resolution to almost every problem out there. There's nothing we cannot overcome. I mean, almost nothing we cannot overcome. So when we look at it from perspective, and that is eternal, place your perspective on the eternal, and look at what we're doing here for eternity.
Yeah.
The job you have is not going to be forever. Most likely, the day you leave, you'll be forgotten. So the most important thing you can do is, if you're married, stay married, have a good, healthy, strong marriage.
Yeah.
I think some of the statistics, I can't speak, statistics show, there's a high divorce rate, but if you look at it from really the empirical data, the divorce rate in law enforcement isn't any higher than other occupations. So it shows that we're committed. But as a friend of mine, Cindy Doyle, says, it doesn't mean we're not unhealthy. I think that we have a healthy relationship. So I would say invest your time in relationships. If you're married, if you have children, build those relationships. Take care of those relationships. And first of all, have a relationship with the Father. Understand that this life is temporary. The average man lives 20,000 days. How many days have you got so far under your belt? You're not guaranteed another breath. You're not guaranteed another second. It could all end right now. And when you get before the Father and he asks you what you did with the talents and opportunities he gave you, how are you going to respond?
Yeah.
You have an opportunity this very day to do something that'll echo into eternity. And so we look at hope from a human perspective. We're all hopeless. But if we look at it from an eternal perspective, it puts everything in earth and in this life in proper perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. Man, what a great conversation. We could probably talk all day, but we'll do it again. Where can people follow you? And you got another book coming out, and you got some books already out there, other stuff. Where can people follow you, or the best place for that?
My website is theadamdavis.com. I'm not I don't think that highly of myself, but adamdavis.com was taken. That was
you should have said the best adamdavis.com. That would have been better.
Theadamdavis.com is probably the best way. I'm on social media. I think it's the official Adam Davis on Facebook or official Adam Davis. Just find me on there, connect with me. Instagram's the same thing. So I'd love to connect with you. If I can pray with you about something, hey, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate what you guys are doing, and we'll continue to work together, I'm sure. For those of you that are watching, thanks for watching, and we will post a new episode every Friday morning at 10. Again, if you haven't yet subscribe, hit the notification bell, and look forward to meeting with you next time. Thank you.